The 2018 election results are now final after the state canvassing board certified the vote earlier this week. There are 3 recounts, however, that now have to happen in state legislative races. That's due to tight finishes, of course, and there are still a court issue hovering over the 2nd congressional district race where a judge agreed to impound the absentee ballots. Wow. So Yvette Herrell's campaign can check for any voting irregularities. Now that is after roughly 8,000 absentee ballots swayed the race in her opponent's favor late in that game. And during that certification hearing, there were complaints from Governor Martinez and a Republican Party lawyer about how the Secretary of State's office handled about 2,800 of those absentee ballots. And Dan, the complaint is a procedural complaint, a little bit of a difference there, but the governor seemed to question the validity of those ballots because the voters did not have to sign the ballot application. Bit of a little weirdo election stuff there, but let's take the governor first. Is she right in her assessment here?
She's 100% right.
Why?
Because it's not a little weird thing in the election deal. It's the law.
Right.
I mean, so
which part of it?
So the law says that you have to submit an absentee ballot request with a signature.
Right.
Period. End of story. Doesn't say that you can use an alternative signature, an electronic signature. They didn't even use an electronic signature. They just matched up the absentee ballot request with the other data that they have. Now, I'm not saying that may not be the way of the future. I'm not saying it may not be better, right? I mean, maybe they do get more information by matching up Eric's request with Eric's driver's license and all that other stuff. I'm not saying that, but the law doesn't allow for that. And, look, I think it was a huge grab by the Secretary of State, but I don't blame the Secretary of State. They did this in March. Right. When she made these changes, she sends out the announcements. Every time these announcements go to the party headquarters, the Republicans get them, the Democrats get them, people that are advocates get them, and the Republicans apparently just decided it wasn't important enough to look into until after it made a difference. I do think the problem is that she doesn't have the statutory authority to just go in and say, I'm going to change the way we do the absentee ballot request form. Period. End of story. Now, they got the votes, they got the governor, they're going to sail whatever through that they want to get done. I get it. But, to me, you couple that with the judge not impounding the ballots when the law clearly says that any candidate can show up, pay $25 per precinct, and they shall. Right. Not they might, they can think about it. So, to me, I don't think any of these things are going to make that big of a difference in the outcome of the election. But now you have an incoming congresswoman who's going to have this cloud over her that, is this been done right? And to me, it comes back to the saying, I used to bark all the time in the legislature. When Notre Dame goes to play Western New Mexico University, why does Notre Dame got to cheat? Why do they even have the perception of cheating? They're going to pound Western New Mexico University. So to me, it just seems like it was a grab. I think the governor was right in this, and I think that it's going to cause problems.
Is this signature thing? There's lots of ways
from a governor who signed her own husband's absentee ballot request years ago. It's a little bit it's a little funny.
Is there enough backstop that the Secretary of State has in place to give you comfort? Meaning, what Dan's talking about, if things don't quite match up, there's other ways to confirm this person is the person.
There's other ways to confirm. They had to sign their voter registration form.
That's right.
I think there is an interesting conversation happening across the country about signatures. I was looking at my Social Security card the other day. I must have been 12 when I got the thing because the signature looks like it was done by a 12-year-old. It looks like me, imitating my mom's signature on a sick note. But this issue of how we verify that somebody is the voter, I think is a larger issue. Signatures have become sort of obsolete in this arena. Now, all that said,
there's a way to sign on a computer now. How does that count?
Ultimately, though. If this results in better election procedures for the state of New Mexico, whether through the legislature, however it works, I think that's a plus. Okay. I think that's a plus. The other thing to bear in mind, it's great that we're seeing the exercise of due process and all that kind of stuff, but the number of ballots that are in question here do not move the needle in terms of this election. There is no question as to who won this election. It just isn't going to make a difference. So the question is, does Yvette Herrell get enough out of it for the money she's going to have to spend to do this work in order to make it worth her time, or does she drop the issue? I think it remains to be seen.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Senator. It's interesting. We talked about a little bit in the green room about this, fraud situations. Are you more or less comfortable with our situation now with where the Secretary of State's coming from on this one?
I'm always on the side of caution, and I am very concerned about that when we rush to do something and implement something, we don't always put the proper safeguards in place. And I would be very interested, particularly on the subject of same-day voter registration. There are, I believe, 15 other states that do it.
That's right.
Well, what do they do to ensure that that is legitimate and there are no fallacies in it?
Are you comfortable those questions could be answered in session if this comes up? And it's going to come up. I mean, the
It
Secretary of
could.
State is, going to do
I
this.
think the thing about it is there are two major issues, as I can see it, on elections. Aside from the fact, I do believe that she was wrong on this. The law does say. Now, if you want to change it, you change the law first,
Right.
and then do it. And like Dan, I'm not arguing one way or the other whether it's a good thing or not, but don't do it until it's the law. But the other is open primaries, and that, to me, the whole point of this discussion was that it would encourage more people to vote. Well, we had, 55% voter turnout? That's amazing. So to get more, I think you'll get a lot more if you allow the people who are declined estates and independents and all of those to vote. But one of the caveats is they can't vote in both elections. Both primaries.
Right.
You have to choose one or the other. So there are safeguards that can be put in place. But to me, that says we could get more people voting than just being able to go and do it the same day
And
election.
your goals matched up with the Secretary of State. It's coming from a different
Right, but
place.
from a different
Right,
perspective.
Exactly. Two things Senator just mentioned: same-day voting, of course, and then open primaries. Let's take same-day. Maggie Toulouse-Oliver is pushing for this. Seems like she's dropped the idea of single ticket, whatever that whole thing was. The benefits of same-day. Do you see the same? Is there clearly benefits there for?
I mean, the thing is, do we, as a state, as a nation, want to address this dismal voter participation rates we have? We're sort of the outlier in terms of most of the development.
Right.
And-
55% of the people show up, we celebrate it like
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, and, so anyway, the fundamental
That's great.
fundamental
Good
choice
point.
is:
Good
do we
point.
want to do everything we can to really make it easy for people to participate in our democracy, regardless of their party or independent or not,
Right.
or do we want to continually sort of stoke this fear that there might be, the chupacabra and the Yeti and this voter fraud are all going to sort of show up because there is no there, right? I mean, aside from some crazies who are perpetuating these myths, the minute somebody shows up with some real credible evidence on voter fraud, then we ought to put systems in place. But it doesn't exist, and so anything same-day voter registration, which we know the states have done it, has increased voter participation.
Right.
Open primaries. Automatic voter registration, which allows people to do this. And we're sophisticated enough technologically, and the Secretary of State, in most of the country, they can figure out who's voting, who hasn't. And I want to remind people, like, if you vote illegally, it's a crime.
That's right.
So who's really going to go out there and say, look, I think I want to commit a felony just so I can vote?
So what's the number of?
There's a woman in
what's the
Texas
number-
that's
but what's
about to
the number
serve
of
8
legitimate?
years
What's the number
in,
of legitimate? I guess my question is, we've been talking about voter fraud since the days I was in the legislature, and we can't get a number from folks like the Democrats, Eric, that say, what's that number? Mary Helen Garcia had a race in a primary. There were over 100 cases of it. They were brought down. They filed charges on some of these people. People went to jail. We have one in Roswell that happened when I was there. You got Sophie talking about the governor. So I think when we poo-poo
Who did not go to jail, I think it's worth noting.
when we poo-poo, right, when we poo-poo that there's no voter fraud, I think the voter fraud does exist. And I think that when we don't sit down and talk about the actual process, like for instance, saying on this application, this online application, the statute very clearly says that it's not the Secretary of State's job to verify signatures, it's the county clerk's job to verify signatures. Why did they say that when they created the law? Because the person in Santa Fe doesn't know who Eric is. Supposedly the Bernalillo County clerk knows who Eric is. And so, I mean, there's just a lot of things that, I think at the end of the day, I don't think anybody's opposed to making it easier for people to vote, but I think that there has to be you have to have the same I think, the same zeal, the same zest for saying, look, we want to make sure every legitimate vote counts, and that whenever someone casts an illegitimate vote or a vote that shouldn't be cast, it dirties the election.
But that's just such a red herring to try to, frankly, to try to keep people from voting. If we had 100% voter turnout and we had a bunch of fraud that was proven, like, you know, why is it? It's like prove that there isn't fraud.
No,
You know,
no,
so you can't- it's hard to prove
we've
a negative.
proven that there's been many proofs that there is. No,
marginal,
but when you have
marginal,
lower turnouts in races, smaller numbers make bigger differences.
But it's never been
I
consequential.
mean, it cost Mary Helen Garcia a race, a Democrat,
that's
and it
true.
wasn't that big of
I
an
don't think
election.
that's true. I don't think that's
but
true.
But
I
I'm
don't
not
think
talking
that's
about
true.
what I think. It's the facts. The numbers that these people lose by, they are important. And look, I'm not saying you should stop
For example,
progress.
we have a race I mentioned earlier about we're still in, you know, counting a lot. We have a 27 vote edge. Martin Zamora over George Dodge. I mean, that gets to the point about how.
But even at the higher levels, right? It's easy for us to sit on the table and say, okay, we got this vote that's being decided by one or two deals. But you got the congressional race down south. Look, I don't think that's going to make a difference. But you look at the congressional race down south. That in the last presidential election, there were 3,400.
We've seen a number of sort of
There were
blue
34
ribbon panels
yeah, but
pulled
there were
together
3,400
by Republicans,
absentee-
and they just haven't
There
found
were-
the numbers.
No, they have. There's been
No,
3,400
they
absentee
haven't.
ballots that were requested in the last presidential election, and in the non-presidential election, 8,500 absentee ballots were requested. And on top of that, the judge says, well, we're not going to impound those until after the state canvassing commission meets and certifies the election. I mean, what's going to happen now? If Yvette Herrell finds 5,000 deals that are wrong, I'm not saying she will, does the state canvassing commission come back and meet again and undo it? I mean, it's just the process is not, people are losing faith in the process.
Since you're rolling here, I'll finish with you the last 20 seconds. Her idea about is she going to have traction in the legislature this coming session with this idea?
Yeah, did you see the outcome of the election? The Republicans are insignificant. It doesn't matter what the Republicans
There's
want.
the answer right there. When we come back to the line, failed plans for a museum in Berlin.